Tension was in the air, and the courtroom was quiet. In the middle was a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, holding a small infant. Her face was splattered with grime, and her clothing were old and faded. But the strength in those large brown eyes was enough to shake even the hardest hearts. From his elevated seat, the judge, a stern-looking man with graying hair and keen eyes, looked down at her. He scoffed, adjusting his glasses. "What is this? A child has a child inside of them?" With a tone full of derision, he declared, "This is a courtroom, not a playground." A few people murmured among themselves, and the audience laughed. The young lady did not recoil. Rather, she rocked the infant while it moaned, holding it closer to her chest. The judge gave a headshake. "What gives you the impression that you belong here, tiny girl? Are you playing house?" The room began to erupt in laughter. The girl then looked up, her lips quivering as she whispered, "This baby," she said in a quiet but firm voice. "The only family I have left is this infant." The giggling ceased. A startled stillness descended upon the room. As though he had misheard her, the judge blinked. With her small hands tightly gripping the infant for protection, the girl inhaled deeply. "And I need justice, which is why I'm here." Throughout the courtroom, there was a gasp. Something akin to regret took the place of the judge's derisive grin. However, the doors of the courtroom flew open before anyone could respond. A man with a furious expression rushed in. His voice roared through the quiet room as his gaze fell on the young girl. "You," he yelled. "You are not authorized to be here." Fear flashed across the little girl's face as her arms grew tighter around the infant. The magistrate banged on his gavel. "Who are you?" He made a demand. However, the man remained silent. He sprang forward, aiming directly at the girl. All of this began 2 days ago. Mila rocked the small infant in her arms while sitting on the chilly hardwood floor of a poorly lighted room. He was barely 6 months old and went by Leo. He had large, inquisitive eyes, silky brown locks, and plump cheeks. He was flawless. He was starving, though. Mila also didn't have any food for him. Her stomach rumbled. However, she disregarded it. She was accustomed to hunger. She was concerned about Leo. His tiny body shuddered. His moans were worn out and feeble. He wiped a tear from his cheek with Mila's. "Shoo, sweetheart. I'll find something, I swear," she muttered. She surveyed the space. There were cracks in the walls and a wet odor in the air. There was an empty bottle next to a lone mattress in the corner. Nothing remained. She was aware that she needed to take action. She went outside, holding Leo close. The streets were mostly deserted, and the night was frigid. She moved swiftly, her bare boots scuffing the uneven sidewalk. At the corner, she came to a small store. She could see aisles of food through the glass window. Bread, milk, free. The image made her stomach turn. She entered. Her heart was racing. The shopkeeper gave her a dubious look. He was a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache. "Girl, what do you want?" Mila took a deep breath. "Please, my infant needs to eat." The man's gaze shifted from Mila to Leo and back again. No food, no money. Her heart fell. There was nothing she could offer him. She turned to go, but then she noticed something. On the counter is a little loaf of bread. She was able to handle it. Only one piece. Enough to prevent Leo from becoming hungry. She reached out, her hands shaking. However, a powerful hand seized her wrist as her fingertips touched the bread. The shopkeeper had an iron grasp. "A thief!" He let forth a shout. Mila let out a gasp. The following moments passed quickly. Shouting. Footsteps. The lights flashed. The cops were called. Without warning, Mila was in the back of a police car, holding a sobbing Leo, and driving to a location she had never been to before. The courtroom. She had no idea what would occur. There was just one thing she knew. She needed to keep Leo safe. Regardless, she ended up holding the only family she had left while the judge made fun of her, while she stood in the center of the courtroom. And suddenly, she saw that the courtroom doors were thrown open and that a furious guy was coming at her. This was just the start. As the man charged at her, his face flushed with rage, Mila's breath seized in her throat. Sensing danger, the baby in her arms wailed. Her little fingers gripped his blanket as she held him closer. The judge's gavel slammed. "Put in order." I insist on knowing your identity." He was disregarded by the man. He fixed Mila with his gaze. "You don't deserve to be here," he spat. "You are a small-time thief. Do you really believe that you can simply enter a courtroom and demand justice?" Mila felt her heart race. That voice was familiar to her. She had hid from it and feared it for nights. Mr. Grayson was the one. The man who had imprisoned Leo and her in that small, decaying chamber. After their mother passed away, the man who had vowed to look after them only ever caused them pain. Her knees trembled as she stepped back. She muttered, "You're not allowed to be here." Mr. Grayson gave a smirk. "You are too?" He pointed a big finger at the judge as he turned to face her. "This chick is dishonest. Someone who causes difficulties. That infant was stolen by her." Throughout the courtroom, there were gasps. "Mila se gaze expanded." She sobbed. "That's not true." The judge's gaze narrowed. "This baby is yours, right?" Mila se mouth trembled. "He's my brother." Mr. Grayson laughed ruthlessly. "She is unfit to care for him. Take a look at her. She is famished and dirty. What on earth is she going to give that baby?" In her throat, Mila swallowed the lump. Telling everyone the truth about what this man had done to them made her want to shout. However, the words became lodged in her throat. The judge let out a deep sigh. "We'll find the truth about this. Remove this individual, officers, unless I say otherwise." Two guards stepped forward and took Mr. Grayson's arms. After some effort, he allowed himself to be pulled back. Mila never got his glare. "You don't know what you did." Before being ejected, he hissed. Behind him, the massive doors crashed. Mila shuddered. There was still risk. For the time being, it had just been pushed aside. The magistrate massaged his temples. He murmured, "This is a mess." He turned back to Mila. His eyes were not merely stern, though, this time. Something more was in their possession. Curiosity. "All right," he said. "Little girl, commence at the beginning. Before everything broke apart, Mila had a mother 2 weeks ago. She was the strongest person Mila had ever met, and her name was Rebecca. She always had a smile for Mila and Leo, even when they were undernourished and she was exhausted from working long hours. She would say, 'It's us against the world,' kissing them on the forehead. However, everything changed one night. The sound of coughing awakened Mila. Uncomfortable coughing that is rough. After climbing out of bed, she cautiously made her way to the little kitchen, where she discovered her mother hunched over the sink, holding onto the counter as though she may collapse. "Mom?" Mila mattered. Rebecca turned with a pale face and perspiration trickling down her brow. She forced a faint grin and murmured, "Go back to bed, sweetheart." But Mila remained motionless. Her mother fell that night. She had vanished before daybreak. At first, Mila didn't get it. She begged her mother to wake up by shaking her shoulders. In an attempt to restore the warmth, she rubbed her small palms against her mother's cheeks. However, she never did. The authorities were contacted by the neighbors, at which point Mr. Grayson arrived. He claimed to be a distant relative of Rebecca, that he would bring Leo, Indiana, and Mila, that he would keep them secure. All of it was false. Mila believed him at first. He provided them with food and a cozy bed. However, she quickly realized the reality. They were never important to Mr. Grayson. Only when he required them to clean or perform errands did he let them out of the little, windowless chamber he had confined them in. He forbade them from attending school. He hardly fed them. And occasionally, when he was upset, he struck Mila. Not difficult at first. Here's a shove. That was a slap. However, things worsened. Mila took all the blows without protest. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply cradled Leo in her arms and reassured him that everything will work out. That is, until she heard a talk one night that chilled her to the bone. It was Mr. Grayson on the phone. He was unaware that Mila was listening. "I don't need them," he murmured. "There is too much work for the baby. First, I'll get rid of him. The young woman. You can sell her." Mila felt a knot in her stomach. She was unsure about his exact meaning. She was aware of one thing, though. She needed to flee. She snatched Leo that night and slid out the window while Mr. Grayson was sleeping. She had no strategy. She simply ran. Her legs burned from running until she was out of breath, and thus she found herself in the metropolis. By themselves. "I am hungry." In a desperate situation, She ended up in a tiny food store because of it, making a bread-grabbing motion. That's how she came to be here, pleading for justice while standing in the center of a courtroom. Mila told her narrative, and the judge listened quietly. There was silence in the room after she was done. Nobody said anything. Nobody even made a move. The judge then leaned forward, tapping his desk with his fingers. You want me to think that a man adopted you, nourished you, and then made the decision to what? Sell you? Mila felt sick to her stomach. He didn't think she was real. She made a fist out of her fingers. I'm being honest, she muttered. The judge let out a sigh. Have you got any evidence? Mila paused. She had nothing. No images. No documents. Not a witness. Only scars. She gradually raised her sleeve, exposing her arms lining of bruises. There was a gasp in the room. The judge's gaze grew wide. The doors flew open once more before he could say anything. A policeman with a pallid complexion hurried in. Your Honor, he murmured rapidly. We recently got an urgent report. Grayson, Mr. He is no longer there. The heart stopped in Mila. Lost? The officer gave a somber nod. He got out of jail. Whispers filled the room. The judge's face was white, yet he pounded his gavel. Mila breathed in short spurts. Mr. Grayson was coming for her, if he was free, and he would not allow her to go away once more. The courtroom's air became heavy, as though everyone's breath had been sucked up by the walls. Mila's hands quivered as they gripped Leo's small frame. She could hear his gentle breathing and sense his warmth. But two awful phrases were all she could think of. He got away. It was impossible to read the judge's face. With the urgency in his voice already fading into the crowd, the policeman stood motionless. The murmurs became frantic whispers that rippled through the room like storm waves. Enough! The judge slammed his gavel down and snarled. The murmurs vanished in an instant. He faced the officer. How? He was protected. The officer rocked uneasily. Sir, we don't know yet. The back exit of the station was unlocked, and one of the officers discovered the cell door open. He has vanished into thin air. Their voices were scarcely audible to Mila. Her ears throbbed with her heartbeat. There he was, searching for her. The judge scratched his temples and sighed deeply. His gaze shifted to Leo, then to Mila, and back to the officer. Make a notification. Every officer in the vicinity is expected to be vigilant. He won't make it very far. With a nod, the officer hurried away. Mila opened her mouth. However, nothing was said. She had a constricted throat. It felt like someone was putting pressure on her chest. She made herself take a trembling breath. The judge's eyes returned to her. His face had changed. Not as sharp, less jeering. He regarded her as if she were more than a homeless child for the first time since she had entered the courtroom. You're scared, he remarked plainly. Mila took a swallow. He'll be after me, she muttered. The judge took a while to reply. He tapped a finger on his desk and sat back in his chair. He then sighed and gave a nod to a woman seated close to the front. Her eyes were sweet and her hair was short and graying. He called her Miss Carter. Mila blinked. We'll need emergency protective custody for the kids. What is protective? Miss Carter, the woman, got up and approached. She smiled softly at Mila while kneeling in front of her. It means we're going to protect you, my love, she whispered quietly. Secure. Mila wanted to think it was true. She did, but she knew the truth in her heart. Mr. Grayson persisted until he achieved his goal. Mila could hardly hear the judge as he went on to give commands to the court officers. Her thoughts were racing. She required a strategy. She had to protect Leo. Miss Carter touched her shoulder tenderly. Come, my love. We'll take you to a secure location to spend the night. Mila paused. She raised her gaze to the judge. Suppose he discovers us? The judge's gaze slightly softened. He won't. It wasn't clear to Mila. With cozy couches and heavy blankets, the safe home was a cozy little space. Other kids were around, but Mila hardly talked to them. She remained near Leo, keeping an eye on the door and listening for footsteps. She was fed by Miss Carter. Bread and soup served hot. However, she was too terrified to eat much. The hours went by. It got dark. The house became silent. Leo and Mila cuddled up on the bed, Mila's fingers grazing his small hand. He breathed calmly, steadily, and softly. She wished she had his ease in falling asleep. She listened while gazing up at the ceiling. She jumped at every creak in the house. Her heart raced with each shadow outside the window. It was Mr. Grayson she knew. She was aware that he would continue to stare. She was also correct, because a sound caused her to sit up straight just as her eyes were about to close. A thump from outside the window. Mila gasped with surprise. She slipped out of bed slowly and cautiously. Leo was cradled against her chest. She walked carefully over to the window and peered through the drape. She didn't see anything at first. Then someone moved in the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, standing motionless. Observing, Mila felt her heart hit her ribs hard. Grayson, Mr. He had located her. Mila's throat tightened each breath. Pressing her back against the wall next to the window, she tightened her grip on Leo. He located us. At first, the figure outside remained motionless. His face was obscured by the darkness as he stood there. Mila recognized him, though. It was palpable in her bones. She drew the curtain aside another inch, her fingers shaking. Then, perhaps like she had imagined, perhaps she was mistaken. The figure advanced a step. His face was visible in the street lamp's faint glare. Grayson, Mystery fixed his gaze on the window. Afterward, he smiled. Mila felt knots in her stomach. Her thoughts were racing as she staggered backward. Miss Carter needs to be woken. She had to tell someone. She had to. She froze when she heard a sharp sound. Click. Her heart ceased beating. The front door. It was secured. It ought to be secured. However, she just heard a sound. It sounded like a lock turning. He was in there. Mila pivoted and took off running. Leo's little breath warmed her neck as she pulled him close. She ran in the direction of the corridor. She needed to track down Miss Carter. But before she got to the door of the bedroom, behind her, the floor creaked. She whirled around. Her throat tightened each breath. At the end of the hallway, a shadow loomed. Slow, steady, approaching her. A faint laugh reverberated through the shadows. Little child, did you truly think you could run? Mila balled her fingers into a fist. No, not now. Her entire life. He had frightened her. Fearful of his actions. Fearful of what he could do. Not tonight, though. This evening, she was battling for more than herself. For Leo, she was fighting. Mr. Grayson stepped forward once more. Turn the infant over. Oh, he said. His tone was cool. I was almost amused. And I may release you. Mila tightened her jaw. I would rather die. His smile got bigger. We can make arrangements for that. Next, suddenly, he made a lunge. Mila spun around and took off running. She was not thinking. She simply shifted. She ran down the corridor, her bare feet banging on the wood floor. She had no time for silence. Had no time to exercise caution. The only important thing was to escape. She ran out the door of the bedroom, beyond the stairwell. She required an escape route. Right now. However, she turned the corner just then. She was seized by the wrist. She let out a scream. She was pulled back by Mr. Grayson. He held on tightly. In her arms, Leo began to scream. His sobs rang across the quiet house. Mila found it difficult, kicking, flailing, attempting to escape. Mr. Grayson, however, was more powerful. I informed you. He gave a hiss. I own you. He pulled her to the rear door, his fingers digging into her arm. Mila breathed in quick spurts. She could not allow this to occur. She was unable to allow him to take them. Mila, consider. She glanced around the corridor. Next, the lamp, only a couple of feet away, on the table in the entryway. With all the remaining vigor she possessed, Mila's body contorted, causing Mr. Grayson to momentarily lose his equilibrium. It was sufficient. She grasped the lamp with both hands as she reached for it. Next, with her entire being, she made a swing. Mr. Grayson's head was struck by the broken lamp. With a choked yell, he staggered back. He relaxed his hold on her wrist. Mila didn't hold back. Running toward Ms. Carter's room, she turned. She didn't knock at all. She rushed inside after slamming her shoulder into the door. Assist! She let out a scream. Ms. Carter woke up abruptly. Her eyes widened in perplexity. Mila? What? Next, before Mila had a chance to respond, behind her, the door flew open. It was Mr. Grayson. He was dripping blood from his temple. Anger twisted his face. Miss Carter let out a gasp, stumbling from bed. Oh! Then, in horror, her eyes widened. Mila was aware of Miss Carter's precise moment of comprehension. But before she had a chance to respond, Mr. Grayson's hand went to his coat and produced a blade. The temperature dropped sharply. Leo continued to weep. Mila felt numb all throughout. Miss Carter said in a tremulous tone, "Write that down." Mr. Grayson gave a grin. "Or what?" Mila stepped back. Her ears roared with her heartbeat. In the faint light, the knife shone. It was Mr. Grayson she knew. If he had a desire, he accepted it. As well as now, he desired Leo. That was not going to happen. Without giving it much thought, she ran to the bedside table. She grabbed the first thing she came across, a glass vase that is hefty. She threw it in his direction. Crash! Against his shoulder, the glass broke. He let forth a painful howl. Stumbling back, he still held the knife though. Miss Carter picked up the closest item, a lamp made of metal, then struck his arm with it. This time, it was successful. The blade fell to the floor with a clang. Also, before Mr. Grayson had a chance to grab it, he was shoved by Ms. Carter. Hard! Behind him, he stumbled over the chair and collapsed backward. There was a painful thump when his head struck the hardwood floor. For a moment, there was silence. There were dry, Ned gasps of Mila's breath. Leo was no longer crying. Next, the air was filled with sirens. Lights flashed through the window, bright red and blue. Miss Carter took Mila's hand in hers. She said, "Stay behind me." The home echoed with heavy footfall. Next, stop. A number of officers barged into the chamber. They lifted their weapons. Mr. Grayson let out a grunt, blinking absently. An officer hurried ahead. His hands were pinned behind his back. "You've been arrested." The policeman let out a bark. The handcuffs clicked. And that's it. It was done. Mila's knees gave out. Before she could fall, Miss Carter grabbed her. Mila's eyes blazed with tears. She wouldn't let them go, though. She only squeezed Leo closer, pressing his silky locks against her forehead. For the first time in a long, long time, they were secure. Mila took a seat on the hospital bed's edge. She encircled Leo with her arms. The chill, the smell of sterile air was antiseptic. She didn't care, though. They were secure. She continued mentally reliving the scene. The sirens, the policeman barging in. When they pushed Mr. Grayson into the back of the police car, his face contorted. It was done. Mila, however, was unable to stop trembling. She was seated next to Ms. Carter. She was holding a hot cup of tea. "Don't worry, my love," she whispered softly. "You no longer need to be afraid." Mila gave a nod. However, the fear persisted, lurking in the recesses of her thoughts. She had run for a long time, looking over her shoulder for so long, that she was unsure of how to halt. What if Mr. Grayson got away once more? What if he managed to return? But what if this wasn't truly the end? She jumped as she heard a gentle knock on the door. An erect officer intervened. Under the fluorescent light, his badge shone. His expression was hard and serious, and his eyes were friendly. "Mila," he said. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded. The cop produced a notebook. "I have some inquiries for you regarding Mr. Grayson." Mila took a deep breath. This time, is he truly gone? The cop's gaze grew gloomy. "He is being held. Furthermore, we have more than enough proof to keep him behind bars for a very long time." Mila tightened her grip on Leo's blanket. That's what she wanted to think. She did. However, Mr. Grayson had a knack for getting over obstacles. Nothing, in her opinion, could keep him imprisoned indefinitely. Opposite her, the cop sat down. "Mila, I must know everything. What do you recall about him? Where you were taken by him? What he did? We must present a compelling argument against him." Mila paused. It made her stomach turn to talk about it. Then she glanced down at Leo's face, which was sleeping. This was something she had to do. For him, she inhaled deeply. "I can tell you everything." Hours passed during the interrogation. Mila filled them in on everything. How they had been adopted by Mr. Grayson following the death of their mother. How he secured them. How he intended to get rid of Leo and sell her. Her chest constricted each time she spoke. It was like reliving a nightmare with every word. The entire time, Miss Carter held her hand. The cop sighed and closed his notebook after finishing it. Mila, you're a courageous girl. Mila only gazed at her lap. She was not feeling courageous. She was worn out. The cop got up. Mr. Grayson is going to be gone for a while. However, we must discuss something else. Mila gasped with surprise. What? Miss Carter and the officer looked at one another. Then he faced Mila one more. We have to locate you and Leo a place to live. Mila tensed. At home. She had been struggling to live for so long. She hadn't even considered what may happen next. Miss Carter gave her hand a squeeze. Sweetheart, we will do everything in our power to keep you together. I swear. Mila felt a knot in her stomach. Are you not placing us in foster care? The cop paused. That's one possibility. You look through his notes, though. There was no additional family listed for your mother. Leo, and you can end up in different places. The heart stopped in Mila. No. She got a shoulder rub from Miss Carter. My dear, no. Mila's tone faltered. I can't let you have him. All I have left is him. Leo's little fingers curled around the material of her shirt as he stirred in her arms. The cop let out a sigh. Mila, we don't want that to occur. However, caring for a baby is not simple. You yourself are a child. I am not a kid, she yelled. The officer gave her a mournful look. You shouldn't have had to mature so quickly. Mila's throat grew constricted. She wanted to fight, to yell, to explain herself to them. She saw it on their faces, though. They didn't believe she was capable. She fought the need to cry even though they were burning at the back of her eyelids. I will stop at nothing, she said. Don't take him away from me, please. Miss Carter's expression grew softer. We're not your adversaries, Mila. We wish the best for you both. Mila tightened her grip on Leo. I'm the safest for him. The room was silent. The policeman exhaled deeply. There might be an alternative. With a glimmer of hope in her chest, Mila looked up. What are you saying? The officer took another look at Miss Carter. Then back to Mila. The court may permit you to remain together if we can locate a guardian who is willing to house you both. Mila felt her heart race. Who? Miss Carter gave a gentle grin. I may be thinking of someone. Mila scowled. Who? Miss Carter paused before speaking. Me. Mila gasped with surprise. You. Miss Carter gave a nod. I am not the parent of any children. I have years of experience fostering children. I would also love to take you and Leo to Indiana if you don't mind. Mila's chest grew constricted. Miss Carter was hardly familiar to her. Was she someone she could trust? Was she really going to be Mila and Leo's home? Then she remembered all that Miss Carter had done tonight. How she had defended her. How she had put herself in danger to keep them safe. And Mila felt something she hadn't felt in years for the first time. I hope. Her vision was obscured by tears. Do you mean it? Miss Carter grinned. With all my heart. Mila glanced back at Miss Carter after glancing down at Leo. And she mumbled, okay, for the first time since her mother's passing. Miss Carter encircled her with her arms, embracing her. At last, Mila let her tears fall as she melted into the warmth. She wasn't alone for the first time in ages. As Mila stood outside the courthouse, the sidewalk was covered with deep shadows from the early morning sun. Leo's small fists gripped the hem of her shirt as he stirred in her arms. Inhaling the subtle infant aroma that always soothed her, she kissed the top of his head. The hearing took place today. A court would determine today whether or not she and Leo could remain together. Standing next to her, Miss Carter gave her a comforting shoulder squeeze. I swear to you, Mila, no matter what occurs inside, I'm not going to let them take you two apart without a fight. Mila swallowed hard and nodded. She wished to believe her. She did. However, she had never had a good life. Why would things be different today? They entered and proceeded down the lengthy, reverberating corridor. With each stride, Mila's stomach twisted more tightly. Miss Carter knelt next to her when they eventually arrived at the courthouse doors. Are you prepared? Mila doubted that she would ever be prepared. However, she nodded and straightened her back. Grinning, Miss Carter pulled the doors open. Compared to the last courtroom, this one was smaller. No whispering, no audience. A judge sits in the front, surrounded by a long wooden table and a few chairs. When Mila saw the previous judge, her chest constricted. The same person who had made fun of her, when she had originally entered with Leo. Would he even consider her? Mila tried to concentrate on maintaining a steady breathing pattern as they sat down. The judge looked over the documents before him and adjusted his spectacles. He responded in a dry voice, "All right. Mila Thompson and her younger brother, Leo, are involved in this situation. Whether the two kids should stay together or be placed apart is up to the court to decide." Mila tightened her jaw. "I can't let them have him. They are unable to." Someone from Child Protective Services, a woman in a gray suit, got to her feet. "Although we acknowledge the close relationship between the siblings, it is important to remember that Mila is only 10 years old, Your Honor. For someone her age, raising a baby is impossible." Mila's hands clenched. The next to speak was Miss Carter, who was firm but composed. "I would like to request guardianship of both children, Your Honor. I've been fostering kids for more than 15 years, and I know how to take care of them." The judge's eyebrow went up with skepticism. "And you're ready to adopt a baby and a 10-year-old? Miss Carter made no hesitation at all. "Of course." The judge studied them, leaning back in his chair. And then he looked at Mila. He steepled his fingers and whispered, "Tell me, young lady, for what reason do you think you should remain with this child? Are you certain you can care for him?" Mila felt her heart race. This was her opportunity. She straightened her back and looked directly into the judge's eyes. She said, "I've been looking after Leo all his life. When we were without food, I fed him. When no one else would protect him, I did. Your Honor, I adore him. I can't speak for anyone else who was expected to say more than that." There was silence in the courtroom. The judge rubbed his temples and moaned. "Child, love is insufficient." Mila felt pain in her chest. "It ought to be." Mila felt Miss Carter's touch on her shoulder. "Your Honor, I think Mila deserves to be with her brother because of her affection for him. I'm not here to take her place. My purpose is to assist her, to ensure that she and Leo have the life they are entitled to. Together." The judge tapped the desk with his fingers. He appeared to be thinking deeply. Mila held her breath. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally said something. "Making this choice is not simple. However, after examining the situation, I conclude that separating the kids would not be in their best interests." Mila's heart skipped a beat. The magistrate looked at Miss Carter. "Your guardianship petition has been approved. Leo and Mila will stay together." Miss Carter squeezed Mila's shoulder under your care. With tears in her eyes, Mila's breath caught. They succeeded. They would remain together. The magistrate struck his gavel. The court adjourned. As Mila stepped outside the courthouse, her face was warmed by the intense sunlight. She was able to breathe for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. Miss Carter turned and gave her a gentle smile. "My dear, you succeeded." Mila gazed down at Leo, who was chatting contentedly in her embrace. She kissed him on the forehead. "We succeeded." They followed Miss Carter to the vehicle, but Mila gazed up at the sky before she got in. She had always heard her mother say that there was always a light waiting someplace, regardless of how gloomy things were. Before, Mila had never believed it. Now, though, she wasn't so sure now. Perhaps, just possibly, this was the start of something positive. With her fingers wrapped protectively around Leo's small hands, Mila sat in the rear seat of Miss Carter's vehicle. Even though they had left the courthouse, her heart continued to race like if they were fleeing an invisible threat. They had no restrictions. Together, they were... Why, though, did she still sense an impending event? Miss Carter's eyes were soft with worry as she looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Would you like some ice cream?" she inquired. "The greatest chocolate sundaes may be found at a place I know." Mila blinked. Ice cream? How long had it been since she had that? Her stomach churned. Her mother had purchased ice cream for her the previous time she had eaten it. Vanilla sprinkled with rainbows. Leo had gotten the first bite as she was holding him on her lap. His fat hand slammed against the small cup as he giggled. It seemed like a different life. Mila gave a head shake. "I'm not hungry." For a moment, Miss Carter's smile wavered, but she didn't press. "All right, my love. Well, let's just go home." At home, it still seemed weird to say that term. Mila had never lived in a home as large as Miss Carter's. It was warm, but not fancy. Secure. Soft couches and bookcases stocked with photo frames and books filled the living room. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, and there was a rocking chair by the window. The wet, chilly accommodations she had previously been made to sleep in were nothing like this. Miss Carter slapped her hands together and put down her purse. "Okay, Mila. Leo, and you have a room upstairs. There are additional blankets available if you need them, and I have a cot ready." At the base of the stairs, Mila paused. Miss Carter's smile remained unwavering. "Leo sleeps with me. That's okay, my love. Whatever suits you." Mila examined her, searching for a deeper meaning in her statements. However, nothing was present. Mr. Grayson was not like Miss Carter. She didn't make demands. She made no threats. She simply gave a damn. That was even more terrifying. Mila cuddled up in bed that night. Leo cuddled up to her. There was silence in the house. Calm, but she couldn't stop thinking. She thought about Mr. Grayson all the time. Was he actually in prison this time? Would he remain there? Or did he already have an escape route in mind? Mila drew the blankets closer to her body. She had to change her way of thinking. Now she had to think they were safe. For her, however, the world had never been so simple. And she knew in her heart, this was not the end of it. She was correct, because Miss Carter's face turned pale as she opened the front door to get the mail the following morning. Heart thumping, Mila sat up immediately. "What is it?" Miss Carter took a deep breath. She was silent for a moment. Finally, she turned and produced a small piece of crumpled paper. Mila felt sick to her stomach. There were only 4 words in the note. "I have not yet finished." Mila gasped with surprise. No name was given. It wasn't necessary. She was already aware of its sender. Grayson, Mr. Miss Carter didn't spend any time. With a harsh, anxious voice, she called the police right away. Sitting on the couch, Mila held Leo tightly as though he could vanish. They would send someone over, the cop on the phone assured them, that they would investigate. Mila, however, was wiser. Mr. Grayson was intelligent. It would be difficult to catch him. Furthermore, he wasn't merely observing if he was transmitting messages. He had a plan. After hanging up, Miss Carter turned to face Mila, her face soft yet strained. "We'll exercise caution, my love. I will not allow you or Leo to suffer any harm." Mila wished she was real, but like a plague, worry coiled in her stomach. She had witnessed Mr. Grayson's power, and she was convinced of one thing. He refused to pause until he got what he desired. This indicated that their time was running out. Silence hung heavy in the night air. In her new bed, Mila lay awake. Leo's gentle breath warmed her neck as her arms encircled him. There was silence in the house. Her thoughts, however, continued to race. "I have not yet finished." She couldn't stop thinking about the words on the note. All her life, she had been watching over her shoulder. She was familiar with the sensation of being pursued. There was Mr. Grayson, observing, awaiting. Her hold on Leo grew tighter. "I will not allow him to kidnap you. I won't." All the doors were secured by Miss Carter, examined each window twice. Additional patrols in the area were promised by the police. But Mila didn't care about promises. Not when she was aware of the monster that was out there. She took a look out the window. I was half expecting to spot a shadow outside. Nothing. However, that did not negate his presence. Miss Carter brought Mila to a little store downtown the following morning. She stated that they needed new clothes, blankets, Leo's diapers, and other supplies. Mila had never gone shopping before. She had stolen before. She was accustomed to taking only enough to get by and escaping before being discovered. She was now standing in the center of the shop. She was surrounded by clothing that she could choose from. She didn't need to conceal anything beneath her coat. I didn't believe it. A lovely blue sweater was held up by Miss Carter. "You would look good in this." Mila gave a shrug. "Nothing is necessary for me." Miss Carter's face remained unchanged. She simply put the sweater in the shopping cart. "Mila, you deserve good things." Those words made Mila's chest hurt. That had never been said to her before. Before Miss Carter could notice the emotion on her face, she turned away. This was not something she wanted to get used to. She had been anticipating the worst for too long, and she knew in her heart a negative event was imminent. She was correct, because Mila sensed it as they were leaving the store. The icy, creeping feeling at the nape of her neck. They were being observed by someone. Quickly, she turned and looked around the street. People walked by in crowds. Men dressed in suits. Children giggling, mothers wheeling strollers. Then again, she caught sight of him, on the other side of the street, standing motionless. Her dark eyes met hers. She felt knots in her stomach. Grayson, he was present. Not hiding, not jogging, standing outside, making fun of her. Her fingers tightened around the stroller's handle. No, this is not taking place. It's not real. However, it was. Her strange stance caught Miss Carter's attention. Mila? What's the matter? Mila took a deep breath. We must go. Right now. Miss Carter scowled. What? Then she looked after Mila. Her whole body froze. She also saw him. Not a word more. She took Mila's hand and abruptly turned the stroller. Hurry up. They moved swiftly through the throng. Mila, however, was aware. He was pursuing them. Miss Carter contacted the police and secured the doors as soon as they arrived home. Mila held Leo close as she sat on the couch. She had a mental image of him, standing in that position, grinning, as though he was already aware of the outcome. Within minutes, the police showed up. They looked about. Nothing. No Mr. Grayson in sight. He seemed to have disappeared. A tall woman with keen eyes, one of the cops, crouched next to Mila. Do you think he was the one? Mila balled her hands into fists. I will always remember his face. The policeman gave a nod. We'll be watching. Remain indoors. Make sure your doors are locked. Mila tightened her jaw. That was insufficient. It was Mr. Grayson she knew. He wasn't going to stand by and do nothing. He wouldn't just stand there the next time. The next time, he would initiate contact. Long and restless, the night went on and on. With her ears straining against the quiet, Mila lay awake in bed. Her heart pounded at the sound of the house creaking and the wind rustling against the window. She knew something the cops didn't, but she hadn't told Miss Carter. Mr. Grayson had no retaliatory motive for pursuing them. He believed Mila was his, so he began following them. And until he got her and Leo back, he wasn't going to stop. She was aware of it. It was palpable in her bones. She refused to allow that to occur. But with a man like him, how could she stop him? Miss Carter's residence felt different in the morning. Mila saw it immediately. Miss Carter's habitual composure appeared forced, as seen by the way she kept looking at the windows and checked the locks again. She was also afraid. Mila's St. Oma clenched at that. What did it signify for them that Miss Carter was afraid? They both jumped when there was a knock on the door. Miss Carter paused, looked via the peephole after that. She exclaimed with a look of relief, "It's the police." She opened the door and let them to enter. The woman with the keen eyes who had taken Mila's statement was the same cop from earlier. Officer Reynolds was her name. She had a solemn expression, too grave. She said, "We have news." Mila felt sick to her stomach. Miss Carter signaled them to take a seat. "What is it?" Officer Reynolds wasted little time in acting. Grayson, is no longer there. The room's air became heavy. Mila felt her heart race. "What do you mean by gone?" Officer Reynolds let out a sigh. Officers were keeping an eye on the area, but he has already disappeared. He was nowhere to be found at his former flat. There is no evidence that he purchased tickets to leave town. No family to visit. Mila's breathing quickened. It does not imply that he went away. Officer Reynolds gave a somber nod. "You're correct. I must tell you something crucial because of this." Miss Carter and Mila leaned forward. Officer Reynolds inhaled deeply. Mr. Grayson is the kind of man who doesn't simply vanish. He has a plan. Moreover, based on his observation of you. She gave Mila a direct look. He's probably going to try to take you. Mila felt a shiver run down her back. Miss Carter's tone became abrasive. That is not going to occur. Officer Reynolds gave a nod. We will ensure it, but you both need to exercise additional caution. Never venture outside by yourself. Always keep the doors locked. If you notice something too, anything at all, give us a call right now. Miss Carter took Mila by the shoulder. Sweetheart, you're secure here. Mila wished she was real. She did. However, she was no longer certain that any place was safe. The day went by quickly. Mila remained indoors, staying away from the windows. Her pulse jumped at every movement outside. She made an effort to appear normal to Leo. She gave him food, transformed him, played with him. However, her smiles always felt forced. Miss Carter made an effort. For supper, she prepared grilled cheese sandwiches. Mila and I sat on the couch, narrated tales about the other children she had taken in, but there was terror, lurking. It was visible to Mila in Miss Carter's eyes. This wasn't over, they both knew. That evening, Mila didn't get much sleep. She was awake, listening, awaiting. Something didn't feel right. It was too quiet in the house. The silence was too much. Next, make a noise. Mila stopped. The house had not been the source of that sound. It was external, directly beneath her window. Her chest grew constricted. She slipped out of bed slowly and cautiously. She crept over to the window and held Leo. She took a quick look through the curtain. She didn't see anything at first. Next, a shadow shifted. Mila gasped with surprise. At the edge of the yard was a black figure, observing, awaiting. She recognized the person. She was aware. It was Mr. Grayson. Mila feared that Leo could be awakened by the pounding of her heart. She staggered out of the window. She was breathing in short bursts. Miss Carter needed to be awakened. The cops had to be called. However, she turned just then. Press. Her blood froze. A single purposeful rap on the glass. He knew she was observing. He desired for her to view him. Mila's hands trembled. He was teasing her. She took a deep breath. She forced herself to get up. She dashed along the corridor. She hardly made a sound as her bare feet touched the floor. When she got to Miss Carter's door, she flung it open. Miss Carter. She let out a gasp. Miss Carter jumped up, aware at once. Mila. Mila hardly managed to speak. He is present. Miss Carter made a move. Running to check the front door, she picked up the phone and dialed the police. She secured it. Once more, despite the fact that it was already locked. Then she reached over to the table and took something. A bat. She looked fiercer than Mila had ever seen her. Miss Carter looked at her. Remain near. Don't talk to Leo. Mila tightened her hold on Leo and nodded. Hours passed in the span of minutes. Next, the siren sound. Lights streamed through the windows, red and blue. There was a knock on the door. Officers. They were admitted by Miss Carter. 3 policemen poured in. Officer Reynolds, one of them, didn't waste any time. You saw him where? With trembling hands, Mila gestured to her window. Outside, the officers hurried. There was silence for a while. Then one of the officers came back. He gave a head shake. Nothing. Mila felt sick to her stomach. Miss Carter's expression grew gloomy. Do you mean she made it up? The officer scowled. No. Something caught her eye. However, whoever it was is no longer there. Mila was ill. Lost. The same as previously. With a somber attitude, Officer Reynolds knelt next to Mila. We will remain vigilant. Until we locate him, we won't give up. Mila clasped her hands. She had no desire for protection. She wanted this to be over. She gave Miss Carter a look. He is unstoppable. Miss Carter had concern in her eyes. Mila inhaled nervously. Then we won't either. Mr. Grayson was still there, staring in the dark somewhere. I'm still waiting. Mila, however, was as well. She wouldn't just run the next time. She would fight the next time. Mila held Leo close as she sat on the floor of the living room. Even though fatigue was pressing down on her, she wouldn't shut her eyes. She had trouble falling asleep. Not right now. Not while she was aware of his presence. In the kitchen, Miss Carter was on the phone, whispering to Officer Reynolds. Only fragments of the conversation were visible to Mila. Unable to continue running. He's constantly ahead of the game. There is no alternative for witness protection. Reynolds, she's a youngster. Mila gripped Leo more tightly. A kid. They constantly referred to her by that name. She was more than a youngster, though. She was Leo's guardian. The only person who really knew what Mr. Grayson was capable of was her. Additionally, she had knowledge that the police did not. He waited for them to make a mistake. Miss Carter sat next to her on the couch later that evening. Give yourself some rest, my love. Mila gave a head shake. I am unable to. With a sigh, Miss Carter tucked a loose curl behind Mila's ear. You're no longer alone, even though I know this is frightening. This is not a struggle you must fight alone. Mila wished she was real, but she knew in her heart she was the only one who could fight this battle. The following day, an odd incident occurred. The police have a lead, according to Officer Reynolds' phone call. She called Miss Carter and said, "We have located a potential hiding place for Mr. Grayson. On the outskirts of town is an abandoned house. It matches the description of his former place of business." Mila felt her blood chill. She understood the meaning of business. It was impossible to read Miss Carter's face. "And tonight we're raiding it," Officer Reynolds stated. "This is where it ends if we're lucky." Mila had a nagging suspicion that something wasn't quite right. It was too simple. No, Mr. Grayson wasn't careless. If an abandoned residence connected to him was discovered by the police, it was because he requested it. This implied that he had more ambitious plans. Mila felt a knot in her stomach. She had been evading him all her life. However, what if it was the error? What if he had been expecting to run? What if stopping his running was the only way to stop him? The cops planned their raid that evening. Miss Carter kept the blinds drawn and the doors locked. Mila, however, sensed her nervousness. Nestled in her arms, Leo cooed sweetly. He grabbed at the hem of her sleeve with his little fingers. She kissed him on the forehead. She said, "I won't let him take you." She meant it too, even if she had to put a stop to this herself. When the phone rang, it was precisely 11:27 p.m. Miss Carter responded right away. "Reynolds." A long silence. Next. He wasn't present. Mila felt sick to her stomach. Miss Carter gripped the phone tightly. "What?" "He wasn't present." Officer Reynolds reiterated, her annoyance evident. The house was deserted. He was nowhere to be seen. No indication that he had visited recently. "We were tricked." Mila's hands became extremely cold. She was aware. She sensed it. Miss Carter took a deep breath. Where is he if he wasn't present? Mila's heart raced at the quiet on the other end. Next, there was a knock on the door. Mila's entire body went cold. The face of Miss Carter turned pallid. There was another knock. 3 times. Slow. Intentional. Mila gasped for air. "No, no. No. No." Miss Carter reached for the bat. She kept by the couch with trembling hands. She gave Mila a look. Her voice was hardly audible. "Bring Leo upstairs. Right now." Mila remained motionless. Miss Carter's tone became piercing. "Mila, proceed." Mila's hands shook. She was aware of the identity of the person behind the door. She was aware. Never had Mr. Grayson been in hiding. He had never run before. All along, he was coming for them. And now, he was present. There was another knock. The wooden door was rapped 3 times slowly and deliberately. Mila breathed in quick spurts. Her entire body cried out for her to run. But she knew from something inside. This time, running won't help. Miss Carter held on to the bat. "Mila, head upstairs. Secure the door." Mila took a deep breath. She desired to hear. She wanted to take Leo and run. However, she was certain of one thing. Mr. Grayson refused to pause until he got what he desired. And if she didn't turn to him right away, she may never have another opportunity. Miss Carter walked slowly in the direction of the entrance. The atmosphere was oppressively tense. Next, crash. The window in the main room broke. Everywhere glass flew. Mila let out a shriek. Someone crawled through the shattered glass. Grayson missed her. He threw Miss Carter to the ground before she could even react. The bat fell to the ground with a clatter. "Miss Carter." Mila sobbed. Mr. Grayson had greater strength. Miss Carter, however, battled as if she had nothing to lose. She kicked, pushed aside, then she hurled her weight at him. But he moved too quickly. In a moment, he took hold of her throat. The blood in Mila froze. "Little child, stay back." Mr. Grayson gave a growl. He had a razor-sharp voice. "Where she passes away first." Miss Carter suffocated, clawing at his hold. Mila felt her chest heave. In her arms, Leo screamed in fear. Her thoughts were racing. It was this. Now was the time. She was unable to wait. She was unable to run. This has to stop. Right now. She glanced at the bat on the ground. Only a few inches separate them. Miss Carter's cheeks were flushed. Mila did what she felt. She grabbed the bat with both hands and lunged forward. And made a swing. Break. Mr. Grayson was hit by the bat right in the side. He let forth a painful howl, releasing Miss Carter from his hold, enough that she could push him away. Miss Carter took a sharp breath. Stumbling back, Mila didn't hold back. Once more, she swung. Break. This time, she struck his leg. He fell to his knees, gritting one's teeth and swearing. His furious gaze swung to meet hers. You're small. Miss Carter kicked him in the face before he could move. He slumped backward, spraying blood on the floor. With a gasp, Mila clutched the bat. Her arms shook, but she held on tight. She would not allow him to prevail. Not right now. Never. Mr. Grayson moaned as he struggled to stand. Then the air was filled with sirens. Out loud. Close. Through the smashed glass flashed red and blue lights. Next, it blew open the entrance door. Officers. The hands are raised. Officers surrounded Mr. Grayson before he could even react. He was pinned to the ground in a matter of seconds. Handcuffed. Defeated. Relief made Mila's body sag. She glanced down at Leo, who was still sobbing in her arms and clawing at her shirt with his small fists. It was done. At last, it was over. The remainder of the evening flew by. Mr. Grayson's nose was oozing blood as he was taken out in handcuffs. As they pushed him into the police car, he gave Mila a scowl. Do you believe this is the end of it? He growled. Girl, you don't get to win. Mila balled her hands into fists. She wasn't scared, though, this time. She took a step forward, keeping Leo close to her chest. You lost already, she remarked. She spoke without trembling. He seemed scared for the first time in his life. The officers forcefully closed the car door, and he was gone in an instant. A hand was placed on Mila's shoulder by Officer Reynolds. Now you're safe, child. Secure. Until now, that word had no meaning. Now, though, she wasn't so sure now. She turned to face Miss Carter, who embraced her tightly. Finally, allowing the tears to fall, Mila clamped her eyes shut. She felt liberated for the first time in a long time, and nobody could ever take that away from her again, not even Mr. Grayson. But she knew in her heart, there was more to this than the finish. It was just the start. The following morning, everything was different. Mila held Leo in her arms as she stood outside Ms. Carter's home. The sky had a delicate pink tint. Her mother used to remark that the type of grieving she experienced signaled that good things were on the horizon. Mila dared to think it might be true for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. Leo's large brown eyes were staring up at her as she glanced down at him, his small fingers clutching the material of her sweater. They had succeeded. They were still alive. With 2 mugs of hot chocolate in her hands, Miss Carter went outside. She ruffled Mila's hair after giving her one. Have you had any sleep? Mila took a sip of the hot beverage, allowing it to dispel the last fear that still gripped her. Just a bit. Miss Carter gave me a knowing smile. That's a beginning. Together, they watched the sun rise over their new existence while sitting on the porch. Officer Reynolds came by later that day. She was looking through some documents at the kitchen table across from Mila. She stated strongly that Mr. Grayson would not be leaving anytime soon. He is being charged with several offenses, including severe assault, kidnapping, and endangering children. He will be in prison for a very long time, based on the evidence we have. Mila let out a breath. Hearing those words was what she had fantasized about. However, a part of her still anticipated discovering that everything had been a lie when she woke up. What if he gets away once more? She muttered. The look on Officer Reynolds' face softened. He won't. Mila wished to think so. Perhaps she might someday. A week went by, then another. Mila's breathing gradually returned. Overnight, the dreams persisted. Fearful that Leo was gone, she still occasionally woke up in a cold sweat and reached for him. However, she always found him there, warm, safe, and still hers. And each and every time, Miss Carter was also present, sitting next to her and massaging her back till she dozed off once more. They were no longer merely getting by. They were still alive. Mila and Leo were taken to a little park by Miss Carter one afternoon. A grassy field, a slide, and a few swings were all that was there. It had been years since Mila had played. Running had kept her too busy, too preoccupied with fighting. However, something inside Mila softened when Miss Carter set Leo in the baby swing and gently pushed him. Leo laughed and joyfully waved his plump hands. Mila grinned, an actual one, like without feeling forced. She was nudged by Miss Carter. Proceed. Go for a swing. Mila paused. Then she moved gently over and took a seat. She softly kicked off the ground and flew higher and higher, feeling the wind blow across her cheeks. She shut her eyes. She felt light for the first time in a long time. She was liberated. Miss Carter cleared her throat as they sat around the dinner table that evening. "Sweetheart, I want to chat to you about something." Mila looked up, feeling anxious all of a sudden. "What is it?" Miss Carter inhaled deeply. "I'd like to adopt Leo and you." The heart stopped in Mila. Confident that she had misheard, she blinked. "What?" Grinning, Miss Carter extended her hand. "Mila, you belong here. Leo and you. I don't want you ever to be concerned about where you're going or whether you'll be taken away. Being your family is what I want. If you'll allow me." Mila's vision was obscured by tears. Family. That term had sounded like a far-off fantasy. The night her mother passed away, she lost something. Perhaps, however, she had not lost it after all. Perhaps she had discovered it once more. She squeezed Miss Carter's hand, her fingers shaking. "Yes," she muttered. Miss Carter gathered her into a tight embrace. "My dear, you are loved." With tears streaming down her cheeks, Mila buried her face in Miss Carter's shoulder. The thought of losing Leo had terrified her. She hadn't simply saved him, though. She had also saved herself. For the first time in her life, Mila slept soundly that night. In the dark, she didn't listen for footsteps. She made no preparations for danger. She simply kept Leo close to her, secure in the knowledge that they would still be at home when she woke up. Nothing could take that away from them now, not even the past.